as I said, for joining us today. It's really wonderful to have everyone here, and we're really excited to be hosting this webinar today. Before we dive in and before I introduce us, I do want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're all meeting today, and by paying our respects to elders past, present and emerging. So I'll start by introducing the three of us here. I am Paige Gardner, the co-director here at Keyy Productions, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Bridget Murray, who is our creative director at Keyy Productions. And Bridget is a safe storytelling expert in this space. So it's wonderful to have you here today, Bridget. And we've got the wonderful Annie Wylie joining us today, who is the Senior Manager of Digital Content at ReachOut. Thank you so much for being here, Annie. It's really awesome to have your expertise. Can you give us a quick insight into your work at ReachOut, what it involves?
Yeah, so ReachOut is a digital mental health service for young people, as well as for parents and carers of young people, and also schools. And so my little part of ReachOut is all the content that we produce. And content's a bit interesting at ReachOut because content is really our service. So it's self-help content that young people, parents, carers and schools can use to move their mental health and wellbeing forward. And so that's the work that I do, and I have a team of producers and coordinators that work on things like storytelling and producing videos, as well as graphics and articles and social media content to help sort of young Australians be happy and well.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. The work, if you're not familiar with ReachOut, which I'd be surprised that anyone in here, this webinar, isn't familiar, but if you're not, please check them out. They do really phenomenal work across the board, and they're a real pinnacle for content in this space, that's for sure. Safe storytelling. Let's start by just talking about what safe storytelling is, because I think there are some organisations and people that don't necessarily know the specifics. I think as a production company, we've kind of coined the phrase ourselves from a production side of things. From the last 5 years of working with clients and organisations in this space, we've really seen a huge need for sensitive storytelling content online. Having that experience, we've really come to see a need for the nuance that's required and understand the duty of care that's needed for content in this space. And so I guess that's kind of how this has all come about from our production perspective. We really see projects in this space, in the safe storytelling space, as projects that involve real stories and lived experiences that are often told firsthand. And also projects that involve more in-depth interviews, or where a participant is being asked to share something personal or emotional in nature, particularly related to physical and mental health and well-being, relationships, grief and trauma. But I also want to note that safe storytelling doesn't just come down to the actual interview content or story content. It can also involve specific sensitive thematic material, core messaging, and also the target audience who might be viewing the content in a sensitive way. That's also worth considering. The purpose of this webinar is to emphasize the importance of safe storytelling online. We really want to provide a resource and an understanding of what's required for successful safe storytelling. Whether you're just dipping your toes into it as an organisation, it's not necessarily something you've done before. I really want this to be a great resource for you. But also, if you're an organisation that does have a lot of experience in this area, I hope that this can also be a reference point for you to come back to when needed. We've also created this as a response to the growing need and popularity of sensitive storytelling. We really see that right now content online is very often emotionally driven content, and less so organizations are creating flashy advertising and marketing material. That's obviously still out there, but audiences are almost demanding this emotionally driven content. And so this is our response to it, because we really do see that there's a need for duty of care and a process to ensure that storytelling is safe and also successful. And no one else is really doing it from a production perspective. And so that's why we're really excited to be doing this today. We are all about starting the conversation at Keyy Productions. So this is about us starting the conversation with you, and what better time to do it than in Mental Health Month. So here we are. So we want you to leave today with a really great understanding of what's involved, what's required, even if you're time poor, knowing that there are production teams and organisations out there that are doing this well and properly and can support you where needed. Today, we'll be talking about content in this space, preparation and planning, including duty of care, interviews, what they look like before, during and after, and how to go about measuring the impact effectively. Bridget, can you talk to me a little bit about content in this space? There are a few types of content that are really stuck and been successful. Can you talk to us about them? And I'll also share some really shortened examples of some of our content to give our audience a bit of an idea of what each type looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Paige. So there are many different categories of content in this space, as well as many different formats that fit within those categories. So yeah, we thought we'd just quickly break down a few of the main ones, or the ones you're most likely to come across. And then hopefully those examples will give you at least a bit of a framework for what can be included. So today we'll look at story and lived experience videos, explainer videos, visual narrative videos, service promos, concept and interest piece videos, as well as user-generated videos. So diving straight into story or lived experience videos, this is a format that I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, would be very familiar with. Typically, they'd include a particular person or perhaps a group of people sharing a personal lived experience of a particular subject matter, or it could be someone who's sharing a story that's not necessarily personal to them, but is relevant to the topic, and that topic is still within that safe storytelling sensitive realm. Generally, these videos include at least one quite in-depth interview, and normally this interview sets the tone or forms the overarching kind of backbone of the video. You'll often find that to accompany the interviews, there's additional visual material, also known as B-roll, to enhance that story and kind of really bring it to life. Again, this can look really different depending on how you want to do it, but we'll show you a particular example now. And then later we'll dive more in depth about kind of the types of safe storytelling considerations you need to really consider with interviews. But for now, let's have a quick look at this example from Sane Australia. This was one of the first lived experience videos they created as an organisation with Christine.
My name's Christine, I'm from Melbourne. I'm a trauma survivor and I'm diagnosed with bipolar. I was just kind of bouncing around trying to do the things, you know, I thought you should do, like study and work and travel, and even though I was doing everything that I, ought to be doing, nothing was improving. The core element there wasn't being addressed. It wasn't until I had a number of episodes of me being unwell and events in my personal life getting to a point where I actually became really unwell that I realised that I needed to get a proper diagnosis.
Yeah, brilliant. So just a super quick example so you can get an idea of the format. Yeah, Annie, anything you'd like to add about this this category of video?
Yeah, I mean, the story and lived experience category is sort of like your ideal category. If you can get a really rich personal story, to accompany a topic you're addressing or something like that, they are the most powerful. They're also, I would say, the sort of have the most inherent risk, which doesn't mean you shouldn't do them, but means that you have to take a lot more care with them because someone is usually sharing quite candidly. But that, there's lots of really great ways that you can make that a really safe space, obviously, that we'll talk about. And it's really worth it because there's such a sort of widely engaged with piece of content, usually across like any sort of demographic we find with young people or parents or teachers, that when you've got a personal story attached to something, it just really like hits well.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the perfect way to describe it. It is that kind of like ideal thing that you strive for, but then obviously, yeah, there is a lot of risk associated with it. There's a real person involved who has real investment in what you're saying. So yeah, we'll definitely dive into that a little bit more. In terms of the next category, which is explainer videos, I suppose, are more on the quite practical side, but these are typically used to inform or educate an audience, or as a training reference or tool for perhaps an internal team or an external team. These can be really valuable assets, and we might use them for things like Q&A with an expert, a demonstration of how we use a service, or to provide really valuable information about a particular subject. So this next example from ReachOut is a great example of how you can balance this really high quality professional advice in a format that's still going to be eye-catching and it's still going to be appropriate for a general audience. So let's have a watch.
My name's Rashida Dungawala. I am a registered psychologist. I'm going to be answering some questions today about loneliness, so let's get into it. Some people will feel lonely because they're disconnected from family and friends and people around them, and other people might feel lonely because they're disconnected from their personal values and activities that they do for their own enjoyment. Many other people might feel lonely because of life transitions, especially younger people. They're going through many transitions from high school to uni or to work, or from uni onto careers, and so that causes a lot of disruption to your social circles.
Yeah, awesome. So I love that video. It was a great one with ReachOut. Annie, anything you want to add about that particular video or the format?
I think that the format there, as you said, you are able to get actually what feels quite personal, and what, you still get that connection with the subject on screen, whilst also it being very professional and very almost technical in nature, because Rashida is, of course, a psychologist and giving, professional advice based on her qualifications. So I think explainer videos, if they're done right, can still have that warmth that you might get from a personal story, but also express, really practical tips and tools and ways forward in a way that, you can almost write your dot points down after the video and go and do them. Which can be really powerful for someone who's after some help.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And I think although you can obviously make explainer videos no matter what sector you're in these sectors that we're dealing with, explainer videos can be such a positive tool, but you do just have to consider exactly the messaging you're giving out, and exactly if you're saying you're providing professional advice, what's involved in that. And there is, of course, safe storytelling in it, which is why it's included in the list. All right, so moving on to the next category, which is the visual narrative format. So visual story videos are a really great way to build a narrative and communicate a message using only visual elements. In this format, you're often using things like on-screen text or graphics, and while you can still feature people, they wouldn't be speaking. So this format can be highly impactful and engaging, but importantly, it's a really useful format when you still need to talk about a sensitive topic or a really important topic, but you can't find that appropriate person to tell it, in a first-hand way, including an expert or a user with lived experience. So that's when visual narratives can really come to play, and they can still be a great way to do it. In this visual story example from Sane Australia, you'll see that they are celebrating the 5th birthday of their online forums by showcasing, pretty simply, some of the things that the Sane forums can help users achieve. Yeah, awesome. You probably might have spotted a little cameo from me in there too, so you're welcome. Annie, any thoughts about this format?
Yeah, I think it's also so you mentioned, that's a great format to use when you can't get somebody who maybe has lived experience. It's also great as the sort of video shows when you might have quotes, and that's what we've used in the past. We might have quotes from users. We might even actually have found a user that wants to share their story but doesn't want to verbalize it and doesn't want to appear on screen. And so it's a really great way to be able to still do that. We'll often also use animation at ReachOut to achieve sort of a similar thing, using a visual narrative to share someone's story without them having to be identified, which is often a concern that people have.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and animation is something that's used a lot in this category and performs really well. It's really useful tool to be able to bring in if you can. The next category we'll talk about is service promos. So service promos differ from explainer videos in that they're usually seeking to raise awareness amongst an audience about a particular support service, like online forums, maybe groups, or just resources that the organisation has available. What is actually featured in a service promo can be quite open, but typically a service promo would feature an expert in the service, like a staff member or even a user or even an organisation partner. Sometimes this format would include B-roll to show the service in action, or other times we could use things like on-screen graphics, or again, animation can really come in here. We'll show you a really short snippet now from Batyr, where you'll hear them discussing their Batyr at Uni program and how it integrates with existing uni services.
So almost all of the universities already have counselling services and similar mental health services in place, but what they don't have is what Batyr offers, which kind of comes before that. We know that a lot of people won't access those counselling services because of the stigma, breaking through those barriers so people don't feel ashamed, so that they feel it's okay to see a psychologist or a counsellor, just like it's okay to see a GP or any other health professional.
Yeah, brilliant. Just a short one there. Anything to add with that one, Annie?
Not really. Pretty straightforward.
Pretty self-explanatory. They can be really useful. We know with things like forums, for example, they can be great because you can practically show not just how people would sign on and like create a profile, but how they can make the most out of them, different groups they can join, different processes they can follow to really engage. So these can be just really practical and helpful for users. Yeah. Right, moving on to concept videos and interest pieces. This is really where the creativity door can essentially be thrown wide open, because this format can really include anything and everything where the goal is to attract attention or to prompt a really engaged audience response. There's so much you can do in this category. There really is a lot you can play around with. But yeah, we wanted you to have a watch of this small section of this video from ReachOut that aims to creatively address the topic of bullying and locker room banter.
Banter?
Banter.
I'd say bullying. Should have gone to Specsavers.
Should have gone to Specsavers.
I'll go banter with that one.
So it's banter.
I feel like it's a lot more banter than bullying.
It's pretty lighthearted.
Skip leg day, did you?
Skip leg day, did you?
I think that's definitely banter. It's banter.
It's a bit of banter. I got that a little bit, hey?
Banter, if he's got 2 legs. If he doesn't have any legs, it's definitely bullying. I think that's self-explanatory, that one.
Don't be a pussy.
Don't.
Right. Yeah, so with that one, it was really fun to create, and obviously, yes, a bit of a unique concept. And Annie, you were super involved with this one. Do you want to tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah, so I think for this one, we had a really specific audience in mind. I think that's where conceptual videos can really come into play. As you said, Bridget, it's where you can throw that creative door wide open. And when you're working with a really specific audience, working to engage with a specific audience that maybe doesn't usually engage with your typical forms of content, that's where concept can really come in. And that's what happened here, where we really wanted to engage young men in a way that felt different for them, that would catch them, because we do know that young men are quite difficult to engage with on the topic of like mental health and well-being. And so that's why we went down the path with a more high concept, complex video where we'd hear lots of different stories and see lots of different people, because it really felt like the best way to actually cater to that specific group. And that's where I really think that conceptual videos, whilst they're like a lot more work, to be perfectly honest, and usually more expensive and all of those sorts of things, they're really worth it when you're trying to engage with an audience that actually just wouldn't necessarily engage with the other types of videos that you might produce for a more general audience.
Yeah, I think that's like bang on, Annie. And I would also say that there's maybe a little bit of a misconception when you're dealing in the kind of sectors that everyone on this call will be familiar with, that you can't be playful with content, that you can't kind of push the boundaries. You really need to stick to something that's quite serious or like a very recognizable format. But examples like this show that there is a lot you can do to still really be safe, spend a lot of effort in duty of care, but yeah, push those boundaries, do something really creative that's going to engage your audience in a totally new way. Amazing. Well, the final category we'll chat about is user-generated content. Now, this format is becoming more and more popular, particularly as businesses have been both prevented from getting out and filming original content in the last 2 years. There's been some exceptions, but for the most part, it's been pretty tricky. But also because audiences are just becoming so more familiar and really starting to love these more raw format styles of videos, both through just consuming massive amounts of social media and just types and styles changing. So user-generated content includes footage that is self-filmed and submitted by community members, but where this is different from someone just sending in a video and you just post it to your channels is that user-generated content will still be professionally planned around a really well-constructed concept, and it will be post-produced professionally to ensure that it is impactful and it's still going to be achieving objectives for you that are really laid out. A good example of this is for Mental Health Month. The Black Dog Institute created a series of super short user-generated videos for their 1 Foot Forward campaign.
I'm taking 1 foot forward for my mum.
For myself. For family and friends.
For Laura.
For myself.
My friends.
My family.
Myself.
Great, like a pretty simple example overall, but you can see why it's quite effective. Yeah, Annie, anything you'd like to add?
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head why UGC sort of works, and it's because, I mean, particularly for me at ReachOut, we work with young people, and young people are very used to seeing that sort of content all over social media. And so whereas perhaps in the past, people may have shied away from that raw approach, it really just works now because it feels authentic, particularly again to young people, but most people are on social media these days. So it feels really authentic, it feels really real. And if you can make sure it's focused, so you give your participants a really solid question and really solid guidelines around how long to answer, how to answer, you can actually put together something that is really powerful and tells a really strong story.
Yeah, amazing.
So let's move on now, still within the content area. But Annie, can you talk to us a little bit about content in the last few years? What's worked, what surprised you, and maybe talk about some emerging trends and how ReachOut pushes the boundaries?
Yeah, so I think, look, as with anything in the world, like everything's changing constantly, and content's no different to that. I think content is an interesting one though, because it's so intrinsically linked with technology. And so as technology and social media shifts, content does with it. And so you really have to stay very up to date with those sorts of things, because what worked 5 years ago isn't necessarily working now. I always find it funny to look at videos I produced, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago and just go, oh wow, I would not do it that way these days. One thing that we've spoken a lot about over the time I've been at ReachOut is video length, and I think that there's a bit of a sort of push to make everything shorter. And I think in lots of cases that's really useful and really effective. But I think what we've sort of discovered at ReachOut in terms of what works and what doesn't is that it's really thinking about what your objective is and who you're dealing with and what platform it's going to go on and all of those things, and then making a decision on length based on that, rather than sort of always sort of somewhat blindly going in and going, well, all videos need to be this length, because there's not actually a formula to it. There's formulas to the fact that we know that if you post something on social media, you have to catch people within the first few seconds. So we know that. But a video can work on social media that's 5 minutes long if it's really good, and if it's targeted to the right people and if it's done in the right way. So I think we've really played with length at ReachOut, and we certainly, you know, previously maybe would have aired on the side of like, oh, well, all videos got to be sort of 3 minutes or under. And for some projects, we do still say that, and that's because we have the knowledge from trial and error that, you know, a video like that for these people and that platform, it does actually need to be this length. But I think that's just been, it's been a really interesting ongoing conversation. I think it's going to continue to be an ongoing conversation because, you know, especially as social media platforms preference different video lengths, and, you know, then you've got YouTube where you could have a 20-minute video, and if it's a great video, then it'll go gangbusters on YouTube. So I think like one thing, yeah, that I've really discovered there is just being really considered in every single case, rather than sort of thinking that there's a formula to this sort of thing. I think another thing we've learned is, and also really, it's probably less of an emerging trend now, and it just is a trend, is that we're really seeing the participants and people and humans, the human story centered within videos. And for some people that might be quite a subtle shift, but I guess what I've seen is that we're really taking a very human-centered approach to content production now, whereas maybe previously we might have had a human story, but there was quite an organizational focus to content. Now we're really seeing human-first content, and that means empowering the participant to be in control of what story they're telling and to be part of the production process. And I think that that's really special, to be honest, that the participant is part of deciding what they want to see on screen and what they want to share, and they're actually a strong and key part of the production process, as opposed to being maybe doing a screener interview and then bringing them in on the day. It's really like an ongoing relationship that people sort of are involved in the whole way. And then I suppose a real emerging trend that I've seen has been around almost user-generated content, which we were just speaking about, but TikTok. You know, we saw this on Instagram, but TikTok certainly pushed this forward in ways we haven't seen before, in terms of people sharing vulnerably online, and just picking up their phone and doing a selfie video, sharing how they're going at the moment. And this is amazing for breaking down stigma, for encouraging help seeking, for encouraging things like being ready to access services. But what we're talking about at ReachOut is how you do this with a strong, safe storytelling slant, and how you do this with duty of care. And so that's a real conversation we're having, because you know, we're entering the TikTok world, and we have the processes and the procedures to make that sort of thing safe. So an influencer, for instance, or just a young person posting online, might not know how to reply to a comment that someone makes because they relate to what you said, and then that might trigger something in themselves, and they might share something with you. Then that puts that user at in a maybe tricky situation. And what we do when we work with people is we give them guidelines on how to respond when you might have someone reach out on social media, how to share a story safely. And so that's, I think, a really big emerging trend that we're really going to see, hopefully those conversations pushing forward, so that we can absolutely still see people sharing vulnerably, because it's so powerful, but doing so in a way that's really safe and encourages those that watch the content to seek help if they need it, and to share their own story safely as well. And that, I think, will be incredibly powerful, and already is incredibly powerful moving forward. So I suppose in terms of like reach out, pushing the boundaries, like this is all stuff that we have been talking about and that we continue to talk about. You know, so at the moment we're working on a project with a young influencer who lives in regional New South Wales, and we've actually worked hand in hand with her to put together the scripts about something. They're about something, a topic that she's passionate about, that she thinks other young people will relate to, and she's filming them herself. And, you know, we'll be helping with the edit of the video, but she's filming them herself in her own style, because we felt it was really important to stick with the authenticity of what her style is and not overlay a reach out sensibility, because I guess where we're moving towards is the fact that, you know, reach out has a brand, reach out has a strong brand, and we have you know, certain ways we like to do things and ways we know work. But what we're really trying to do is just listen to young people and be able to shift those things and move those things along in line with where young people are, both, you know, where they are on platforms, but also where they are, you know, emotionally and what they want out of the content that they view. Because honestly, like, that changes month on month, and you've got to just like stay in contact with yeah, sort of what's happening in that space, and we're really trying to do that at the moment.
Yeah, it's great to hear that it's not just content for content's sake anymore, and it's not just about talent. It's about engaging a person, a human, and a story, and all of that comes with it, and getting huge amount of input. I love that. It's really exciting. I want to move on to preparation and what that looks like, and we'll start with briefs. Safe storytelling needs to be planned in detail so that it is in fact safe, so that it is impactful, and also so that you're all maximizing your budgets as best you possibly can. And briefs, we feel, are the cornerstone for successful safe storytelling. I know when we work with ReachOut, we always start a project with a really detailed brief from them and a great in-depth conversation, which always kicks us off into a really great start. Annie, can you talk a little bit around what ReachOut, how you come to creating your briefs, what you consider beforehand?
Yeah, I mean, briefing is maybe the most important part of the whole process. You can have a great shoot, you can have amazing people involved. If you don't have a tight brief, then it is probably not going to hit the mark. And to speak to safe storytelling, like, you may not be addressing something in a safe way. So the brief to us is the cornerstone of what we do. And we'll actually often use briefs as an opportunity to think through an idea. So we might have the inkling of an idea and we'll use the brief to clarify that, because if we can't write a good brief on it, then it's not a good idea.
That's great. I didn't know that.
That is great.
Yeah, like, and so we have briefs that have never gone past brief, because we wrote the brief and we went, it's not really hitting. You know, on the other hand, we'll have a brief and suddenly everything will be clear. And, you know, really there's a couple of very, very key parts of our briefing, and that is that we consider the objective, we consider the audience, and that we consider the duty of care. And every piece of content will have duty of care. It may be as simple as having something clinically reviewed at various stages, but we'll decide that at the briefing process, so that we're not wondering throughout the process, oh, should we get this checked? Should we talk to this person? At the briefing process, we map that all out. And then it also means that, you know, for instance, when we work with you guys on a video, it means that we can be really clear up front with you guys around what, you know, we're going to be, you know, what the process and the timeline is going to look like, which can be really helpful, I hope. So yeah, the briefing process to us is just absolutely key for being able to identify everything up front, both from a, you know, engagement and effective content point of view, and also from a duty of care and safety point of view, to go, okay, we're going to need these checks and balances. We're going to need this much time to establish, you know, whether this person's safe to tell their story, get someone who might need to be on call, all of those sorts of things. So really, like, the briefing is everything. Spend as much time as you can on briefing.
I love that. I couldn't second that more. That's great. Yeah, great to hear. Bridget, can you race us through a little bit, just in terms of an overview of what to include in a brief?
Yeah, for sure. I honestly think, yeah, Annie, you covered a lot of what I would probably say, that from a production side, we also need to know, I think, yeah, again, there's maybe a little bit of a misconception with some projects that your production team can kind of come in last minute and just sort of turn up and film. But when you are making safe storytelling content, that should just be off the table from the start. They really need to be looped in. So to add to what Annie was saying, yeah, a really solid brief is just going to make everyone happy. It's going to make the content a lot better at the end. So we would always recommend for your briefs to think about things like giving us as much background information as you possibly can about where this idea has come from, what it's in response to, even what the discussions have been with your team around it. Obviously, any ideas you have about the concept, like what it looks like to you, what you wish it would look like, anything like that, we can obviously help mature this or add to this, but knowing your initial goals is brilliant. Same objectives. This is really key for us. We love to know both if you have any measurable objectives, like a conversion rate you're going for, as well as more intangible objectives, like what you're looking for the audience to think, feel, and do from this content, which is something that ReachOut does every time they give us a brief, and it's super valuable, just knowing what they want that audience reaction to be. Again, more information about your audience is brilliant. Obviously, if we're making a video for an audience of GPs versus an audience of like 12-year-old gamers, like there's going to be a little bit of difference there that we need to consider. Think about your deliverables, I would also say. So think about this not just in terms of short term, like the one key asset you want to make, but maybe think about what you want to use 3 months from now, 6 months from now. Do you need cut downs? Do you want to, get some specific content that you think will be relevant closer to Christmas time or closer to next year's mental health month, for example? Next up, I'd probably say budget is something that is really important to talk about. I know this one can be really hard. And again, production companies can help you if you don't really know where to start. But even just a ballpark frame is just so important. And if you're working with a team you trust, you'd know that they're not going to take advantage of that. They just really need to know upfront. Same with timeline. Be as upfront as you can about your timeline, your expectations for what you'll need on the production end, as well as when you want to have the final asset. And give us references. If there's a video that you love, if there's a video that you hate, send them over. I always think that's really, really helpful. And the very last thing I'd say with briefs is be open. I'd encourage you to be super open about your needs and your concerns. If, for example, budget is really key for your organization, flag this early so that it can be kept in mind the whole way through the process. If you're concerned about how to make the filming safe for the participant for a particular reason, flag this, and it will always be factored in from the very start.
Thanks, Bridget. That's a great call. And I want to highlight the planning and timeline elements, just in case there are people on this webinar that haven't necessarily engaged with a video production company before and don't really know what it involves. As we said, planning is really paramount to great content and to making sure it's done safely, and to also maximizing your budget. And working with a team that you trust can help guide you through that. We're biased, but we obviously really recommend you do that so that you're not kind of wasting time and money, and that you feel confident that it is being produced safely. And with a timeline, something to expect is around a 5 to 6 kind of week turnaround. And that includes the proposal phase, a couple of weeks for pre-production and planning, and really taking care of all of that from the video production company side of things. Maybe a half day or a day for shooting. Sometimes it can expand to more than that, but not often. That's often the quickest and easiest part of the process in a way. I say that not being a videographer, so I say it's easy, but it's not necessarily. And then post-production can take 2 to 3 weeks when you're talking about feedback and adjustments and preview edits and approving preview edits and things like that. So you're looking at about a 5-week or 6-week turnaround, and you don't ideally want to rush that or diminish that planning process. Let's move on to duty of care when it comes to preparation. It's a huge kind of talking point as part of this webinar. I really want to talk about it in depth, because you know, when we're talking about safe storytelling content, people are sharing their personal stories or experiences, they can feel vulnerable and unsafe. They do need to have that confidence that they're going to be supported, because trauma and emotions can arise when they're talking about their own lived experience. So there is a real need and responsibility for effective and planned duty of care, that's for sure. Bridget, from a production perspective, can you talk us through what duty of care looks like from our side of things?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot that goes into duty of care, and what duty of care looks like on the production side versus on a client side, which you'll hear more about from Annie, is quite, you know, a little bit different, but still aligned. I'll break it into, maybe like the 3 key parts of the production process. So in terms of pre-production, for us, duty of care really means doing everything we can to prepare for, establish, and plan for a safe environment and safe conditions for the participant and for the production team, just being as aware of that as we can be. And there are obviously really practical things we do there rather than just conceptual, like, let's think about this. We actually do have steps that need to be put in place. It also means tailoring any messaging so that it's sensitive to the target audience, and that we're being really conscious of our responsibilities in terms of what messaging and info we're going to be circulating. It also means being really clear in pre-production and open with the client about the duty of care responsibilities on both sides of the fence. So they can let us know what they need, we can let them know what we need, and that's just very transparent right from the start. In terms of production, our responsibilities on set and what we do to ensure that we have the safest filming conditions possible is really paramount, whether that's being really attentive to like just the moods and the conditions of the filming participant on the day, or whether that's actually putting in place strategies and structures around how we film and what we film. Being really deliberate even about things like lighting and camera positioning can make a real difference. And then for post-production, it's again being conscious that your duty of care doesn't stop at the filming day. It does carry on after. That's really important. Also, I want to flag that we want to be really clear in post-production that we're not compromising any messaging for the sake of the edit. By this, I mean, if a video could be maybe like flashier or poppier, or we think we could do something really outside of the box and cool, but that means having to sacrifice the original intention or the quality or the clarity of the messaging, we will intentionally choose to preference the integrity of the messaging. I think that's really important to keep in mind with safe storytelling.
Yep, absolutely. That's a great call. Annie, can you talk to us a little bit about what duty of care looks like at ReachOut?
Yeah, so duty of care is embedded in our entire content production process. So from the moment we come up with an idea, we're talking about duty of care. So if we're talking about working with somebody sharing their story, whether that is through appearing on screen or perhaps visual narrative, or not in video form at all, which we often do as well. We actually have a group at ReachOut called Support Group, and that is a cross-functional team of people at ReachOut that work with our users in different ways. And we first have a conversation with our support group and say, look, we're thinking about doing this thing. Do you have, any flags from this sort of like, we'll give them a vague outline, and do you have any flags? And they're a really great resource to be able to sort of tap into. But of course, like within our content team, we're thinking through things like, is this person ready to tell their story? And we actually use a modified K10 wellbeing sort of scale check. Because generally, if someone is really in the thick of experiencing something, it may not be a safe time for them to share their story. It also, from a messaging point of view, if someone's really in the thick of something, they may not have actually come through far enough to give a viewer a really strong message of recovery and of resilience yet. It doesn't mean they're not going to, but from a messaging point of view as well, you really want somebody that, it doesn't have to have been 5 years ago. It can have been fresh, but it's about where they're at and what they've got in place. The other things we'll look at are, do they have, good self-care strategies already in place, or do we need to talk them through that? Do they have people that they trust, that they can, you know, speak to about this opportunity? Other things around safe storytelling also might be that they, you know, do we want to talk to that person about whether they're sharing something that might involve other people and therefore might have a little bit of a risk around, you know, particularly if you're looking at something like bullying, for instance, which will inevitably always involve two sides. And, you know, it's really important to be careful about that. So, yeah, there's sort of a couple of the things that we will really, you know, consider. And often it's a matter of just making sure we've got time in the timeline, because every situation will be different. Just making sure we've got time in the timeline to be able to talk to a production team, talk to an illustrator, talk to a writer, talk to the person themselves, and talk within the team to sort of make sure we're doing the right thing and make sure we're really upholding our duty of care to that person.
Yeah, great. I can't reiterate enough how important duty of care is. I'm sure every organisation here today has one, but yeah, it's about really knowing what it is and what it looks like, and working with an agency or production team or whoever it is you're working with in conjunction with that. That's for sure. Thanks, Annie. It's really great to hear that insight. I want to move to interviews now and recruitment, what that looks like. Annie, can you tell me a little bit about how you go about that? I mean, I know you've just said you've got the K10 and that. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've sort of mentioned a couple of things around that, but really, you know, what I think will be useful is thinking about how you recruit somebody. So obviously there's lots of different ways you might recruit. It might be through personal contacts. It might be call outs to volunteers of your organization. You might even use casting agents or do social media adverts. And we make sure that any call out that we send has help seeking information on it, because even seeing a call out might trigger something for someone. So always put help seeking information relevant to the industry you're working in and the cause you're talking about. And we'll also, on any form we send out that might have like a ability to sort of write free text, we'll make sure that people know that in filling that out, that's not something that we're going to read straight away, because some people may have a tendency to see that as a form of help seeking. And what you don't want is to have someone bare their soul and expect a really fast reply because they've asked for help. And so it's really important to be upfront just in your preamble text, just to say that, you know, we can't provide 24-hour support, and that's not the intention of this. And then beyond sort of those pieces, once you're really, you know, then it's about doing a pre-screener with someone. And the pre-screener is always about all about making them feel safe and comfortable and giving them clear information about the opportunity. So you want to give them options for the format, so that, you know, that you're centering their experience and their preferences. Give them clear information about what might happen on a shoot and what we're even looking for and what our objectives are, so that they can make a really informed decision and they can contribute, you know, really positively. And also, so because a lot of people haven't been in a video shoot before. So, you know, you've got to actually give them that information so they can be informed, and make it clear that this opportunity to be involved, you know, isn't a form of help seeking. Whilst a lot of people will find that sharing their story really helps, you know, it's not the intention of it. And just little things like they can drop out at any time, that we can fulfill any needs they have, make sure they've got a self-care plan. You know, I always make sure to tell people that you're going to be exhausted after a shoot. So don't plan to meet up with 20 friends at the pub afterwards, because that actually might be too much. At least give yourself an hour or two to decompress after a video shoot. And that's really, really important, because a lot of people won't think about that. They'll just go about their daily life and suddenly crash because, you know, it's all been a bit overwhelming. And then the other thing, and this is something that I don't think a lot of people think about, is how you tell somebody that they're not appropriate for an opportunity, because you will have people, you know, who apply, who don't go ahead with. And we at ReachOut, we have, you know, actual sort of pro forma responses that we can draw on, that we've worked with our clinical team on, to make sure that they're really, you know, open and honest responses. And it's really important to be open and honest with people, but make sure that people, you know, aren't taken aback and that they feel like they're still in a safe space, even though perhaps they haven't, you know, been chosen for this opportunity specifically. And then the other, I guess, just final part of follow-up is if someone has been chosen and you have gone ahead with it, and you're getting ready for it, just make sure you're in regular contact and you do have follow-up with them, because, you know, it's important to remember that person is being vulnerable with you. You've probably never met that person face to face, and yet you've probably been on the phone and they've told you their story. And so it's really important to remember that, you know, prompt communication, open communication, is going to give them a really positive experience, and is going to help them to share their story, you know, effectively for the project and also safely.
Yeah, it really is about including them as part of the process rather than just the storyteller. That's for sure. Bridget, can you give us a run through from a production perspective in terms of what interviews look like before, during, and after?
Yeah, definitely. I'll skim this a little bit because there is actually like a lot that goes into making sure that an interview is, you know, super safe, but while being something that the participant actually enjoys. I think a lot of what Annie said is super, super relevant. It's really about treating that person like a person, not just a story that you want to tell. So getting them involved from the start is really important. And also on our end, in terms of pre-production, being as aware as we can be of things like their potential triggers, any personal information that they don't want to share and they don't want to discuss in the interview, that's fine. I do think there's maybe still a misconception amongst a lot of people that when we say interview, it's a really formal current affairs style grilling, and that is not what it is at all, and it should never be that. So I guess that feeds into what we do on set, which is really all about conversation. I can't emphasize conversation over like one-sided communication more. The producer who is on set and who is going to be conducting the interview should really be the one. They have such a clear idea of what the goals of the content are, so that we are practically trying to achieve something. I don't think we can lose sight of the fact that we are trying to make a piece of content from this, but that's their job to remember that, so that the participant, when they're there, really can just settle into that conversation and feel comfortable and feel like they're not trying to hit any technical goals. They can really just tell their story in the way it wants to be told. I also think being really upfront with them that if they say something they don't like, they can tell us and we won't include it, that we can take breaks, like building in those breaks is really important. And also, I guess, from a production standpoint, it's being really confident to be able to know when you need to stop, or if you need to call it, if that person needs a break. There's a lot of, I guess, emotional awareness that goes into this type of storytelling that's really crucial. And also like making the set as fun as you can, or as like personal. Often you're talking about really serious topics, but people have signed on because they want to tell something, they want to get something out. And so getting them involved just makes it a really enjoyable experience, and hopefully something they can reflect on and be really proud of themselves for having participated in.
Yeah, nice. Thanks, Bridget. After the interview, Annie, can you give me a quick insight into what happens after the interview from a ReachOut perspective?
Yeah, so after the interview, you know, I just spoke about how follow-up's important throughout the process, and it's no different now. We will always, you know, make sure we involve people in the post-production as well, because that's really where the story becomes tangible and you start to see what it really looks like. And so it's really important to involve them so that they don't feel like they've just given you their story and then sort of been thrown out to dry. So really vital that you check in sort of immediately afterwards, just to make sure that they're doing okay. And that, you know, the process was positive for them. It's a great chance to get feedback. They might actually have really valuable feedback that, I actually felt a bit uncomfortable about this, or I loved the way you did this. It made me feel very safe. And people are often very willing to share that sort of thing, but also offer any support that they might need. So we'll always say, and we say this in pre-production as well, so they know this and it's clear that if they do require additional support, then that's something that we can help them with if they need us to. And also just to keep us in the loop that if, you know, they might have their own support, but just to let us know, hey, like I did actually find this quite tough. I wanted to let you know that I'm talking to my psychologist about it, and I'm feeling good about it, that I can move forward. But that was my experience, and giving them a space and an opportunity to be able to share that with you is really important. It's also a great chance to like continue to connect with that person and you know, make sure that they're going to share on their social media the great sort of piece of content that they've produced with you, because really it is like a co-production, and so you want them to be as invested in it you know, as you are. And I think that that's like really important. I think, again, encouraging them to do self-care. And I'll just speak to like briefly if things do go wrong, because that will happen and it's not necessarily a failure of anybody. But we at ReachOut, we all have mental health first aid training as well as assist, so applied suicide intervention training, and we'll utilize those skills if something does happen on set where someone feels triggered, or you know, it feels moves into sort of a state of distress. But we also, as I mentioned before, have a support group, and so we always actually have someone on call. So of course we have staff members at the shoot, but we have someone external to the shoot who's got a little bit of extra training, who'll be on call. So if something happens, our process is we'll call that person. They'll be able to talk us through, you know, what an appropriate action might be. And we actually have a member of our leadership team on call too, just in case. Because some actions you might need to take is you might need to contact emergency services. You might need to contact an emergency contact for that person, a friend, a family member. You might need to sit with that person. It's not your job to counsel that person. You're not a counsellor, and it's really important it's actually a big part of duty of care to make sure you're not crossing lines and boundaries. But having mental health first aid skills can be a really great way to be able to connect with that person and guide them towards getting the support that they need. And of course, if something does happen in that case, then it's even more important to do a follow-up, if not a couple of follow-ups, to make sure that you know, you're able to offer them anything that the organisation can offer them. And then the final thing with that is to actually do a bit of a retro and reflect, because it's a chance to learn. And so maybe it's something you missed, maybe it's something you did as you normally would, and actually this situation was a bit different. And so I always just like to, you know, really have a growth mindset with that sort of thing, and you know, be confident that actually, you know, you can move forward probably bigger and better by taking the time to reflect and learn and figure out sort of what may have happened and figure out how you might be able to prevent that in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, in the last minute or two that we have left, can you really quickly run me through how you measure the impact of the content at ReachOut? And I know user testing is a big thing for you.
Yeah, so user testing is huge. We actually aim to have at least 80% of our content tested through users. And we do that throughout the process. So we might have a script looked at, we might then have a first draft looked at, we might have a final draft, we might have a concept looked at, we might have a storyboard looked at. And it sort of be making various decisions with that based on whether it's something quite new for us or something we feel like we know a lot about. And so we have actually these user review groups set up, one for parents and one for young people, and they represent a very big cross section of society. And so we're really able to confidently go, well, this is the objective we hoped to reach, and we've tested it with users, and users say it's doing that. And so we can confidently go, great, let's put it into the market. And then the other things we do is we have, you know, an evaluation framework where we do things like on-site intercepts. We have an annual survey, and all the content we do fits within our theory of change, because all our content is aiming to drive behaviour change. So that might be that it's aiming to create service readiness in somebody. It's aiming to help that person feel less alone. It's aiming for that person to reach out and seek help. And so we embed that into the briefing process, of course. And then we're able to look at that afterwards through things like user testing and our evaluation framework and go, yeah, okay, X percentage of people said that this did create a service readiness in them, or this did provide immediate relief. And so then we know, okay, it achieved its aims in that way. And that's like a really important and useful way to do that. And then just quickly, like in a more casual sense, we try and make sure multiple staff members are looking at things so that we're not, like everyone lives in a bubble. We try not to, but we do. And so we really try and make sure that we're having, different staff members look at different things at different times to really make sure we're not missing things, because you know, for those that work in areas where safe storytelling is important, we're usually working with vulnerable communities. We're usually working with a large cross section of society. And so, yeah, being able to get as many eyes on something as possible is always a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We've gone a couple of minutes over time, so sorry for that, but it's been really wonderful to have this conversation. I could talk about it all day, as could Bridget and Annie, I'm sure. And as I said, we really wanted to start the conversation. You can download our Safe Storytelling Guide. That'll be sent to you tomorrow, along with the recording of this webinar that you can watch again or share with any of your peers and colleagues. And you've essentially met Bridget from our team today as well, so feel free to reach out to her at any time. You'll have our contact details tomorrow. Just to get the conversation started. I can see there are a few questions in our chat box. We'll address those when we send out the webinar recording as well tomorrow, so you'll have those. And Annie, Wylie from ReachOut, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really wonderful having your insights and expertise. We really appreciate your time, and thank you to everyone else as well for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. See you later.